Welcome back, it's your guy Engineer Mojo with another car tutorial video. Today I'm working on a 2014 Toyota Venza. This will be a front brake change. Rear brakes will not be shown in the video, but it is a very similar process. To get it started off fast, tools are displayed on the screen as usual. Let's get this install started. First order of business is to jack up the car and put it on jack stands. You want to do this by locating the secure point on the vehicle to jack the car up. At a location toward the front of the car underneath the front doors, you'll see a reinforced section of car frame that you can use to jack up the car. Just place the jack right underneath that location, begin the jacking process, and then find a good secure spot for your jack stand. Next step, I go ahead and remove the car lug nuts on the wheels. Now if you don't have this trusty impact gun like I have, then you'll need to do this process while the wheels are on the ground to give you that leverage to be able to twist the lug nuts off and not have the wheel spin. But given this trusty tool, I can do this while the tires are in the air. Once the tire is removed, I like to place the tire right underneath the front of the car. It just gives an extra sense of safety if the car just happens to slip off the jack stands or the jack. Here's a quick overview of the caliper mount bracket, and the caliper guide pin bolts. Also the brake line attached to the caliper. Very important step right here before you continue on. Make sure that you go into your engine compartment, find the brake reservoir cap, pop it just a little bit so that pressure does not build up as you're depressing the pistons in the caliper. As you depress the pistons in the caliper, if this is closed, you could pop some seals or damage the master cylinder. Here is some closer video of the caliper and the components. You have the guide pin bolts at the top and bottom of the caliper bracket. These can be removed with your standard metric socket and your socket wrench, or a handheld wrench would work as well for here. Quick footage of removal of the guide pin bolts. With the caliper housing removed, now you can actually see the brake pads. As you see on these brake pads, they do have shims and retainer clips on both the top and bottom of the pads. So you'll make sure that when you get new pads, you should get new hardware. You want to replace those with the new brake pads. I like to put down a cardboard box or some kind of towel to catch any of the brake dust that falls while I'm doing the rest of the procedure here. And now it's just a quick video montage of the actual pad removal and shim install. I have the removal of retainer clips, removal of the pads, they slide right off. Note the orientation of the indicator strip and where that goes. I lay out the old pads with the new pads just to make sure I have the orientation correct. Pull off the old shims with some needle nose pliers. I'll note the orientation of the shims as I pull each one off one at a time. Install the new one, just press that in. Repeat the process for the top. At this stage, it's also a great time to grease the guide pins. You can pull those right out. Now I didn't get good video of me greasing the pins, but I put a link down in the video description below that gives a step-by-step process of how to grease those pins. It's pretty easy. Now comes the step of depressing the pistons within the caliper. At this stage, I like to take the old brake pads to use as a bearing surface for the large C-clamp. Here I'm showing you how I get the old brake pad and the large C-clamp in position to begin the depressing process. You can also use your standard brake tool here that you can get as a loaner from your local auto parts store. But if you don't want to go all the way to the store, using a big C-clamp and the old brake pad is just as good of an option right here. Here's a close-up of the orientation of the large C-clamp, how it's braced against the back of the caliper, and then it's going around, wrapping around, bearing up against the old brake pad, which we use to depress the piston inside the caliper. And it's not too hard to just twist that and depress the piston inside the caliper. Quick clip showing the process of the depressing of the caliper pins. Next, you want to take your brake cleaner and spray down the rotors to get rid of any residual oils or dirt that may be on the rotors before you install the new pads. Next, we have the installation of the new pads. Be sure not to touch the braking surface of the pads that interacts with the rotors. That way you don't get any residual oil or dirt that may impede the braking ability of your pad. New pads will slide right onto the shims. If you're having some issues getting the pads seated on the shims, feel free to use the large C-clamp to gently depress the pads together against the rotor. Make sure you don't damage the retaining clips / shims as you're doing this process. Next is installation of the spring clips. There are small holes where you insert the spring clips. Slide them in as shown. Top and bottom, don't forget there are 2 there. As mentioned earlier, don't forget to grease the guide pins that are on the caliper bracket. I didn't get good video of this, but again, I have a link down below in the video description. You just pull those right out, lightly grease the guide pins and slide those back in, making sure that the dust boot is seated correctly back inside the caliper bracket. We're at the home stretch here. You want to reinstall the caliper over the brake pads. Now that you have depressed the pistons, this should slide easily, semi-easily over the new pads. If they're not sliding easily over the new pads, then you just go ahead and depress the pistons just a little bit more. You may not have depressed enough. You can also reinstall the guide pin bolts. Those will be torqued down to approximately 24 foot-pounds. I put that in the video description. It's also on the screen. Take note that when you're reinstalling the guide pin bolts, there is a little bracket, that little metal bracket that you see me pointing to right now. You want to make sure that the flat side is facing on the top and the rounded portions are on the sides. That's the correct orientation to be able to tighten down the bolts to the correct spec. That's pretty much the completion of the brake job. Now all you have to do is reinstall your wheels and the lug nuts, which can be torqued down. The correct torque for that is approximately 76 foot-pounds. Also, don't forget to reapply the cap to the brake reservoir. Go ahead and press that down. As you're watching this video, if you have any tips that will make this easier, please comment down below. I love tips. Helps me, helps the community. If you have any comments to share that you like the video, please include that down below as well. I'd love to hear those. As always, thank you for watching. I appreciate the community here at YouTube. I'll catch you in the next video. I'm out.